Thanks very much. Cheers. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of South Cambridgeshire District Council's Scrutiny and Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Graham Cone and I am the chair of this committee. Along the top table we have with me to my right is Councillor Stephen Drew, my vice chair, and to my left Ian Senior, who is the Scrutiny and Governance Advisor. I will introduce the other attendees when I invite them to speak. This meeting is being live streamed by your presence here in the chamber and via video conference. You are deemed to have consented to being filmed and to the use of images and sound recordings for a webcast and archive recordings. When addressing the meeting, speakers should not disclose any personal information of any individual, as this might infringe the rights of that individual and breach the Data Protection Act. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate, there being at least 4 Scrutiny and Overview Committee members here in the chamber. If any member leaves the chamber, would they please make sure that they notify us for the minutes of this meeting. Finally, a report of this meeting will go to Cabinet on the rearranged date of the 28th of September, and I believe that the committee's vice chair will attend to present it, as well as the report on young people in South Cambridgeshire. So we will start with apologies. Ian, do you want to do apologies?
So we've got apologies from 2 committee members, and they are Councillor Martin Khan and Councillor Sally Ann Hart. And we also have apologies from Councillor Bill Handley and Councillor John Batchelor, who are cabinet members.
Thanks very much, Ian. They'll be noted. So we then move on to declarations of interest. Have any members got any declarations of interest they want to declare? Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to mention that I am Director of SCIP, South Cambridge Investment Partnership, and also SCP South Cambridgeshire Projects. SCIP gets a mention in the business plan.
Lovely, thank you for that. Any other declarations of interest? I can't see anyone in the room or online indicating to speak, so we'll move on to the minutes of the last meeting. Have any members of the committee got any comments or amendments to the minutes that they have in front of them? There's no one indicating to speak and no one online, so we will move on to public questions. There are no public questions. Members will, however, find a statement attached to the agenda. This relates to the next agenda item, and because nobody is available to present the statement in person, it is therefore here for your information, and I will summarise it at the beginning of item 6. So we're all happy we've got that. Okay, so we'll move on to item 6, pages 17 to 70, which is the mutual exchange policy. And I will start by reading that summary. So the tenant representatives of... Yeah, that's fine. The tenants' representatives of the Housing Engagement Board have submitted a statement to be considered alongside the report. In summary, in relation to under-occupation, the tenant reps accept that, as at many other councils, the housing associations under occupation by 1 bed will be allowed. They submit that there is no logic to continuing to refuse like-for-like exchanges or other exchanges where there will be no increased over or under occupation. They submit it is very important to remember that the Housing and Localism Act 1985 and 2012 listed grounds where councils were allowed to refuse exchanges. It was not an order or recommendation, it was just meant that it would not be illegal. They submit that this is not the council making the best use of its stock, paragraph 15, or promoting health and well-being through housing. In relation to overcrowding, the same arguments apply as with under-occupation. Some councils, such as Norwich, also allow overcrowding by one bed in mutual exchange. The tenant reps submitted that it makes no sense to refuse an exchange where the overcrowded tenants are unable to find a suitable bigger property but wish to swap without worsening the overcrowding. People may need to move to be nearer work, schools or family with all the life challenges, benefits that brings. This does not effectively encourage overcrowding as claimed in paragraph 19, but the refusal does deny social mobility for those who cannot find a bigger property with no gain to the council. The clear principle should be that if the overall overcrowding is not made worse, then the mutual exchange should be permitted. In relation to staff, elected tenant reps firmly believe that without the appointment of a dedicated specialist officer to administer and promote mutual exchanges, then the risk of an ombudsman's findings will remain high and the opportunities for social mobility will be reduced. Failing this, we believe that at very best, a named officer should be identified who will have overall responsibility for the operation and promotion of mutual exchange to ensure accountability. In conclusion, the tenant reps hope that the Scrutiny and Overview Committee will will support tenants in their desire to improve social mobility in South Cambs. That's the end of the summary, and the committee members should bear in mind that tenant representatives' comments when reviewing the mutual exchange policy that we have in front of us. So I think what we'll do now is move into questions from the committee. So I'll open it up for questions. Thanks very much. Councillor Rippeth.
Thank you. I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but something I did notice was the desire of those tenants for a full-time post to be created for this issue with dealing with mutual exchanges, which the council currently, according to these papers, does not want to do. So first of all, I wanted to ask how many kind of requests come in per annum for mutual exchanges, and with a kind of freeing up of these regulations that this would enable, what kind of increase might we expect? So I'm assuming is that to Peter Campbell in this case?
The lead member for housing, I don't think is present, so we'll go to the leader, Bridget Smith.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and if she wants to refer that over, I'm happy for that. You're on mute, Councillor Smith.
Sorry, my apologies.
That's okay.
I was distracted then by an emergency call, but I will pick that up. Thank you.
Okay.
I kind of.
Sorry, do you want to repeat it again? I'm sorry, I had my telephone ringing there with somebody who needs to speak to me urgently.
Thinking about I'll make it really simple. How many requests come in for mutual exchange per annum currently?
How many? Right, I'm going to refer to officers because it's not actually very many, but because that's a technical question, I'll have to refer that over if that's okay.
Peter Campbell, did you want to come in?
Yeah, myself and Julie are both here to take questions. So I can't remember the exact number, but it's in the region of 40. 40.
Okay. 40, yeah. So
Yeah.
with 40 kind of per annum currently, with this kind of freeing up of regulations, what might you expect that to increase to? Because surely tenants might think, oh, it's easier to do this and it's more, it's more viable for me to make an exchange in the future. And so I'm thinking about, should we be putting in, an officer post for it?
It's obviously difficult to speculate what the numbers may be. We'd hope there'd be an increase, but I don't think it would increase, into hundreds. And what members will notice is that on the summary of the recommendations, what are covered in page 18 of the report, is that what we're saying is that the officer's proposal is that we continue with the current arrangements, but we monitor the numbers. So if there is a significant increase in numbers, which suggests the need for additional staff, we'll review that at that time.
Thank you.
Councillor Bridget Smith, did you want to come back in?
Yes, if I just intervene there. So obviously it's been made clear that it's something we'll monitor. The problem with having a dedicated officer is that you then introduce a single point of failure. And we've been at great pains over the last few years to weed out single points of failure within the council. So, if that one officer is on holiday or unwell or something, it then means that, their inbox is filling up with requests and nobody's there to deal with it. So, it was the feeling of Cabinet that it's far better that you have officers, multi-skilled officers who, so there's a range of people who can deal with these requests, because actually a single dedicated person often causes more problems than it saves, really.
So just to follow up, so would it be a good idea to sort of split that full-time post maybe into a number of people's job descriptions, that it would be covered so it doesn't kind of fall below the radar almost? Just a suggestion.
Thank you. So, that's an operational decision, but it certainly, if we have multi-skilled officers, then that negates that sort of risk. Also, what Cabinet heard when we had the presentation about this was that there wasn't a sufficient workload to justify a single dedicated officer to do this work. But I'm sure Peter or Julie can give more detail about how they're currently managing it and how they can make sure that we maintain capacity to provide the best service to our residents.
The only thing that I'd add to that is that the role of the housing officer is a generic housing officer who covers the patch. And that gives them knowledge of the area and of the tenants themselves. So there's as much advantage of having a generic officer covering the area that there would be a specialist who may know the process better, but will not have the same knowledge of the tenants or the locality.
Is that okay, Councillor Rippeth? You want to come back on that?
No, that's fine. I think Thanks. I've had quite a long turn.
Thanks very much. Councillor Anna Bradman.
Thank you. I've got two questions. They're both rather complicated. So, anyway, it's up to Councillor Smith who she directs them to. So the one question is about what you class as a bedroom or a potential bedroom. You remember in the report there's reference to old-style parlour rooms, which to me indicates a room downstairs. And so for my money, my question was, doesn't this rather depend on what you class as a potential bedroom? And does this mean we'll end up with over-occupation using living rooms as bedrooms? Now, that may not be a problem in such a style of old-style parlour house, but I just wanted a sort of a view of that. And the second one really is quite complicated, so it might be easier to ask that.
I'm happy for that to happen. So, Bridget Smith.
Thank you. So I think what's important is that our officers are able to take a pragmatic view, and where we run into problems is if we run a system that's completely inflexible and doesn't take into consideration the sort of nuances of people's situation, but also the particular housing. So I think where we've run into problems before is the lack of flexibility in the system. So I'm going to look to officers to back me up on this, that we're trying to be pragmatic and flexible. And this is people's lives we're talking about. And if it really improves their lives in order to have a parlour bedroom downstairs, then we should be doing our utmost to facilitate it within our policy.
Yeah, so just come in there. So what Councillor Smith is saying is absolutely right. So occasionally we do have people who are overcrowded in a traditional 3-bedroom house, and who would normally qualify for a 4-bedroom house because of the family size. But because they're so in such short demand or short supply across the district, it seems pragmatic to allow those families to move into a larger 3-bedroom house that has an additional room downstairs, which could be used as a bedroom. So to make it clear, when we're defining a bedroom, we don't make any judgment from the size of the room. It's a bedroom is a room which is used locally as a bedroom.
Okay, thank you. And I hear what is said about the need to be flexible for individual circumstances, and I'm happy with that. I'm just thinking it would be unfortunate if that ended up in, for example, the loss of a living room. I appreciate the implication of the parlour is that it's not a very much used room, so that's fine. Now the second question, it relates to a situation that I encountered, which was where this was to do with a housing association, and a vulnerable tenant undertook a mutual exchange in order to get away from somebody who was bullying them next door. So you will appreciate this is vulnerable tenant moves away from problematic tenant, new tenant moves in. New tenant that then gets bullied by the same person who was bullying the original person and finds out where the previously bullied tenant has now moved to. Now, fortunately, in that situation, we as a county council were able to step in and offer council accommodation after quite a complicated process, but we did manage to do that. But I'm just hoping that we can be sure that as landlords, we would be looking out for that sort of possibility and taking every step we can to avoid it. I hope I've explained it clearly enough that you understand what I mean. It's just, I want the reassurance that that's why it's important to have officers being aware of what's going on around the tenant, not just for that tenant.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bradnam. Councillor Smith.
So, there are as many situations as there are tenants. And I know that our housing team are exceptional in their ability to deal with, these very tricky situations that come up not often, but come up occasionally. So I don't envisage this having any negative impact on our officers' ability to deal with these. Sorry, but mad puppies here, I'm afraid, barking away. I don't see that this would this would in any way negatively influence our officers' ability to be able to deal with these very sensitive situations. Thank you. I don't see why we should suddenly see an increase, but I think Peter's already indicated that we don't really know. But I personally don't see why we should suddenly get a great surge in demand. This is just about regularising the council's policy, getting rid of a couple of anomalies and just simplifying it and making it more tenant focused, I hope, and making sure that we deliver the best service. But as Peter's already said, we have to make sure that we're building capacity into our system that does allow us to cope with any increase in demand. But again, that's quite technical, so I'd like to refer back to officers for any further detail, please.
Okay, so when we have a normal empty property and we deal with a relet, we have a responsibility to bring that property up to a relet standard before we sign up for the new property. The difference with an exchange is that it's a swap of tenancy between two tenants, and much of the onus then about checking the condition of the property lies with the incoming tenants. So they would view the property. So, for example, if a tenant left one of our properties who changed some doors as a normal termination, we may ask for that person to replace the doors with something which is more suitable. If it's a mutual exchange, the incoming tenant would make their own decision whether or not they accepted those doors. And only would only go ahead once they were satisfied. So in reality, the promotion of the mutual exchange scheme is likely to save us money on repairs rather than lead to an increase in costs.
Mainly in the context of the two examples that the tenant reps gave in their full submission. So they gave an example of two situations where an exchange would not be permitted under the proposed revised policy. And I just wanted to ask whether or not we would have another way of dealing with those situations, whether that it seems like a reasonable concern that is being raised here. And would under our revised policy, would we actually be able to meet those concerns, or is it possible that the one bed under occupation limit as a strict limit is perhaps a little too inflexible.
Thanks very much. Councillor Bridget Smith.
Okay, so, we have to be realistic about this. The demand for our housing greatly exceeds, what we currently have. And I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of people we currently have on our waiting list, but it is considerable. So, it is really imperative on us to make the best use of our housing stock. And therefore, we really shouldn't be encouraging under occupancy. I think we should be doing everything in our power to make sure that people have the house that meets their needs. I think we are prepared to accept what the tenants have said about this flexibility on one bedroom, but it's not desirable, because if we have a 2-bedroom house with one couple in it, that means there's potentially a family of a parent, 2 parents and 2 children who actually we haven't got a house for. So, this is, sometimes you've got to be a little bit hard-nosed about this, because we have lots of people who don't have a decent home. So we have to make the best use of the stock we've got. I don't know actually how we, in reality, we're dealing with that at the moment. So perhaps if Julie or Peter would add in the detail, please.
Okay. My comment is, first of all, the current policy is that we allow no under occupation at all. So moving towards 1-bedroom under occupation is seen as good practice. That's what the majority of councils do. We are aware of one other local authority who offers currently what the tenants are asking. I spoke to them last week, and they told me that they're phasing that out because it's unfair in their eyes. But with regard to there are 2 points about what the tenants are saying. The examples that they have are the examples made to make a point, and they're assuming that a mutual exchange is the only way of moving. In reality, most people move house through our allocation system and will continue to do so. And we will, of course, be flexible. If people have got a need to move, which is difficult to capture in a policy, we will make sure that there is discretion available within our working practices in order to help people who are in need of a move. It is, of course, very difficult to codify that within a policy, other than to refer to the use of discretion.
Councillor Holborn.
So yes, thank you for the answers. So I think the aspect of these examples that caught my attention was the fact that they highlight situations where there's no increase in under occupation, and where there would be other advantages to the exchange. So I totally appreciate that there are good reasons not to encourage too much under occupation, and we need to have a system that encourages efficient use of the housing stock. I totally appreciate that. But I was concerned about the examples because they were not examples that would have increased the under occupancy. They were examples that would not have decreased it, but would have brought other advantages. And that's why I wanted to raise the point. May I move on to the second question? Yeah. So the second question was about the overcrowding, the response to the request around overcrowding. Now, and so I really wanted to ask what kind of risks have been assessed here, and what was the consideration around those risks? And I'm assuming that there's a wariness here into slipping into a situation where we might end up with a gradual increase in overcrowding in our council houses, and that the reason for the revised policy being as it is was to make sure that doesn't happen. But what I wanted to ask is how how that decision was arrived at and what risks have been considered in terms of the overcrowding issue.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
So I'm going to have to pass that one on to Peter or Julie. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll start off and I'll bring in Julie to talk a bit about the housing needs work that she does. But in a way, the answer is very similar to the one to the previous question, is that we cannot look at mutual exchanges in isolation, and many mutual exchanges will work that you have a family who wants to upsize and a family who wants to downsize. Typically, an older couple who are in a larger property will want to move downsize. A younger couple with a growing family will want to exchange upwards. And they'll both benefit from that arrangement. What our objections were to overcrowding is that really that's not solving any problem. It's just shifting a problem for one property to another. And what our preference would be to try and identify other suitable accommodation for that family to move into through the normal waiting list and allocation system, either in their own stock with it or with the housing association. Do you want to come in about housing needs, Julie?
Yeah, just to come in really in terms of the overcrowding, I think how we've come to sort of position we have in terms of the policy was in terms of obviously if the class was overcrowded, they can go on the transfer list on our housing waiting list, and they will be given priority because of that overcrowding. And we feel that because of that, they should be able to move into more suitable accommodation than rather go into another property where they're overcrowded. It's tenants' choice in terms of finding the mutual exchange that they want to swap to. But what we, as Peter said, we don't want to just move the problem, and we know from sort of housing management that people who are overcrowded, you tend to get more sort of antisocial behaviour. You've got more people condensed into the home, less space, etc. Doesn't bode well. So we don't feel that we can be seen to say yes, it's okay actually if you want to be overcrowded, because we don't feel it is. We feel that we need to support you to move. The only reason we've gone for the 3-bed sort of parlour type situation is because we know we have very few 4-bedroom properties available, and therefore the likelihood of them finding the mutual exchange or potentially through the transfer are much slimmer. So, whilst that would still give a person their own sort of bedroom, even if it's sort of like a parlour room, we felt that was sort of the best flexibility, really. Just in terms of housing needs, both overcrowding, but I think more under occupation, it's having that awareness actually, especially in terms of family-sized accommodation, that we do have a huge waiting list, over 2,000 applicants on the waiting list. Many of them are families with children, when perhaps you've got a single person in the 3-bed, and we would say, okay, it's fine to exchange to another 3-bed when we know we've got so many people waiting. Again, we feel that's perhaps a step too far in terms of the mutual exchange policy. Thank you.
Councillor Holborn.
Thank you very much for the answers. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we've got Councillor Sue Ellington next.
Thank you, Chairman. I was very pleased to hear that the Councillor Smith say that we were looking to be pragmatic and moving towards being more flexible. And one of the things that I couldn't find in the document, it may be there, but I didn't read, and I perhaps didn't read every word, is that that some weighting should be given to somebody who wants to move closer to friends or family, and the mutual exchange will facilitate that. And I feel there ought to be a paragraph somewhere that says we will look very favourably on this sort of mutual exchange arrangement.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
So I think, as I'm sure Peter and Julie have lots of evidence of the reasons that people actually choose to do exchanges, but my own experience in 15 years of being a councillor is actually the need to be closer to support networks is in my experience probably the most popular one for people wanting to move. So I think that often is a factor. I don't know that with exchanges whether these things require a weighting, because I don't think they're competitive necessarily, are they? Oh, right. Okay. So I'm seeing shaking heads. So, it's a kind of, it's not as if somebody's competing against somebody else for the exchange. It's about something that's mutually beneficial between two households. But, it would be, as I say, I think being near support networks or needing to look after elderly mum or, have granny who can look after your children is probably the main reasons, but I don't know whether Julie or Peter can add a bit more detail into that. I'm slightly guessing.
No, you're absolutely right. So a mutual exchange doesn't offer weighting, the allocation system may do. So the mutual exchange will basically be, we'll have a list of properties, and it will say, I have got a 2-bedroom property in Cottenham, for example. I'm looking for a 3-bed in Swavesey. If somebody has got, something which is the opposite to that or close to it, it is then up to the tenants to arrange amongst themselves if that's a suitable swap for them both. We don't get involved with offering any weighting whatsoever, but just make sure that they've got full information which to make their decisions.
Okay, Councillor Ellington, do you want to come back?
Thank you for that reassurance.
Okay, so Peter Fain, Councillor Peter Fain.
Thank you, Chair. I think we would all be very sympathetic to the submission by the tenants on page 13. I'm particularly struck by what they say about wanting South Cambs to be in the vanguard. Well, Peter Campbell has drawn attention to the fact that being in the vanguard is not always an advantage, but I would also accept what they say at item 2 about the benefits of mutual exchange and about being flexible, and I welcome the fact that the council is proposing to be more flexible. I was concerned in particular about what they say at item 3.1. And they say that the South Cambs, I don't know whether the leader or indeed officers would agree with this, that the South Cambs mutual exchange policy for years has caused untold misery to tenants seeking to improve their lives by denying them the opportunity to exchange properties for no logical reason. That was obviously a statement that must be of concern to us all. Just in asking my question, I would also stress that if for some reason it is not felt appropriate to approve a mutually agreed exchange, that does not, of course, result in the release of a house, or usually, I guess, of a house that may be slightly overoccupied or underoccupied. And I think the tenant's key suggestion is that a degree of under or overoccupation should be allowed when it suits both tenants. And I wonder whether the leader or officers want to comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Bridget Smith.
So I think we've acknowledged that. I think the fact that it's been picked up externally that our the policy we had wasn't best practice, and that was because there was a lack of flexibility in it. It was too rigid. What the history? I don't know what the history of that is. I don't know when it was last revised. It might well be many years ago. So I think we've acknowledged that. We've acknowledged that we have to build in flexibility. Because people have to have some degree of choice over whether they are they're under-occupying a bit and therefore, paying more rent. Whether they are they're slightly overcrowded because they really like the house they live in. They really like the house and they're prepared to put up with a little bit of overcrowding because the house is suitable, location's suitable, granny's down the road, that sort of thing. So I think we have acknowledged that, and I think what's proposed here builds in that flexibility, which will hopefully address the concerns and make the whole system and the policy more user friendly. And as Councillor Ellington said, we're able to be more pragmatic and less rigid about it, because that's what makes people happy.
Okay, Peter, do you want to come back on that? Councillor Peter Fane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm entirely satisfied with the leader's response on that point.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we're going to Councillor Libby Earl.
Actually, Councillor Ellington has said more or less what I wanted to say, which was that very often I think support networks are important where people live, and from the point of view of the local authorities, like this council and also county, can actually have a financial implication too. So while we might want to keep our properties occupied to the optimum, there will be occasions when a family wants to move simply because they need to provide a support network, perhaps to elderly relatives. And if they're not doing that, then that support network will fall to social services completely. We perhaps need to just take into account, and I think we are doing, I think there's going to be flexibility here, that someone may well be, in inverted commas, doing local authorities a favour by moving, and perhaps we ought to just allow a degree of flexibility if there's going to be under occupation of a property where somebody is going to be providing support networks for someone else. And ditto the other way around, asking people to downsize. And I've certainly come across this where a single person is being asked to downsize, but in fact that person is elderly and their support network is local. And if they were to downsize and move to a completely different location, they would then be thrown on the good auspices of social services for their support network. So I think that's important.
I can see a lot of nodding, but I will come over to Councillor Bridget Smith just to comment on that.
Well, that's right. It's because I couldn't agree more with Councillor Earl. So as somebody whose mum is living in the back garden, so two doors away, and if she wasn't there, she'd be taking a care bed somewhere. So, she is only allowed to, she's only able to stay living independently because it takes me 30 seconds to run round to her house when she presses her panic button, and then find that she's forgotten why she did it, but never mind that. So absolutely, and particularly as we start, we're tackling the cost of living crisis. I've got a new grandchild. It's going to cost £100 a day for that child to be in a nursery. So I'm expecting the call for about the grandchild as well as granny. So I think with the cost of living crisis and all the pressures that families have to maximise their incomes in order to pay their rents and their very high mortgages, I think those familial support networks are going to become much more important, much more akin to what we see in other parts of the world, actually, where it is extended family networks that are proximal to where people live, that allow them to live their lives. So families are, we need our families more these days. So couldn't be more true. And you're quite right, Councillor Earl, we have to be, when we're making these decisions, we have to be factoring that in. Because if by being inflexible, it then means that granny or granddad goes into a care home, or somebody's mortgage can't be paid because a parent has to stay at home looking after a child because they can't work. There are serious repercussions from an inflexible system, which is becoming more and more apparent.
May I just jump in if that's okay?
Yeah,
on the end of that, just to provide some reassurance. So council tenants are secure tenants. Their tenancy, is for life if they want it to be. So we will never force one of our tenants to leave the property because they are overcrowded. If we recognise that that person is having difficulties, we may have a conversation with them. We may talk about options of either exchanging or going on the waiting list to help them to move to a suitable accommodation in an area of their choice. And we will give them financial support to help them to do that, but we'll never force anybody out.
Judy Fletcher.
Thank you. If I may just add to that. So obviously, as officers, we think the policy does give that flexibility in terms of supporting those people that want to move because of support networks, etc. And what we're trying to achieve is if someone's in a 3-bed but actually only has a 1-bed need, we're trying to say, actually try and find somewhere. You can go to a 2-bed, but actually not like for like is what we're saying within the policy. However, I think at 11.14 of the policy, there is a discretion there in terms of looking at it on a case-by-case basis. If we were to refuse mutual exchange based on the policy, there is discretion there to actually look at it again if there are extenuating circumstances such as, savings in terms of care, support, etc. So I think the flexibility is also written within the policy to allow us to have that discretion where there's evidence that actually there's a real need for that person to move and perhaps that a property that's suitable for them isn't available in that area.
Okay.
Can I just add that if we are going for a flexible approach and we're going for multi-skilled officers, can we be assured that officers will all feel able to exercise that discretion, or at least have someone to go to make sure that they can? Because I can see that with a fairly junior person, perhaps, who lacks confidence, that flexibility could be threatened.
I see nodding heads again, but I'll bring Judy Fletcher in.
Thank you. Just to confirm on that, any discretion will be at service manager level, so it wouldn't be up to a housing officer. That would have to be considered by the service manager at that point. Hopefully that will give you some comfort in terms of being able to apply any discretion.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we've got Councillor Judith Rippeth.
Thank you for letting me have another crack of the whip. I really want to say that I think this is a really good move and a really good policy, because it's going to be much more flexible, and everyone's already spoken about discretion and social mobility in its widest sense. And I understood from reading it that actually this flexibility could, counter to what you might think, reduce the number of void properties, because there must be some properties that really just don't get filled because they would be under occupancy. I just want that confirmed. So we might actually, rather moving away from treating sort of numbers and boxes approach to a more kind of freer approach, that we might be using the council homes to the optimum level in any case.
Okay, Councillor Bridget Smith.
Well, I think we do. I think we do. And one of the issues we've noticed in recent months is that when properties are vacated, we're seeing quite a lot which are left in not very good condition. And so that's why, and we're coming on to KPIs and so on later, it's taking longer than we would wish to re-let some of these properties, because they need an awful lot of work done on them to bring them back up to condition. But I'm not sure. I think the turnaround we have is as fast as we can possibly make it. But again, I'll refer to officers for a bit more detail.
Councillor Judith Rippeth.
I was
sorry, do you want me to come in? So,
yeah,
the mutual exchange is as I said, is a swap between two tenants. So that will have very little impact on properties that are otherwise empty. So what I think you're talking to about Councillor Repeth is the time it takes us to deal with the void property from the keys handed in through refurbishment back to relet. That is a different process that we are looking at, and is although it's not been great, we're in a much stronger position now than we were a few months ago, and that's within the KPI report coming up next.
Councillor Griffith.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm mindful of and it's in the report too, I'm mindful of the risks of perception of unfairness when you move from a formula to a system where you exercise discretion, but I'm sure the officers are aware of that too. You know, I have had people say to me, oh, but that lady over there moved into a 3-bedroom house when that would have been perfect for my family. That's real stuff. However, I'm satisfied that the tenants' concerns have been considered very carefully in this report, and I thank our officers for looking into this so thoroughly. And I'm satisfied that the recommendation, which is summarised, I know this is just the summary of what's gone on, but the recommendation at paragraph 7 on page 18 of our papers is a very thorough addressing of all of those potentials for perception of risk, but also allowing flexibility to enable officers to take a case-by-case decision. So I'm happy that we should move to the recommendation, and I'd support this.
Okay.
May I just add, just come back on one thing,
yeah.
if that's all right, councillors. I think you make a really important point about the issue of discretion, and that is partly why we've said the discretion should be limited to getting the approval of more senior officers. What we also are hoping to do, and although it's not mentioned in the policy itself, is to keep a record of when discretion has been applied, which we will then review on a regular basis within our managers group to making sure that, you know, although there is discretion available, that discretion itself is applied in an equitable way.
Thank you for that. Are you happy with that, Councillor Bradnam? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Richard Stobart.
Chair, thank you. Just a couple of brief points. The policy, I think, is excellent. And I think in the policy document, the setting out of expectations for the parties involved is very clear. And I think that's an excellent feature. Just one thing, and I was looking at paragraph 21 of the policy on authorised mutual exchange. I was a little bit worried about the possibility of coercion. So if one of the parties wasn't so keen on the exchange and another was, and there are all sorts of shades of possibility there, how can that be picked up and countered? Are officers equipped to investigate that kind of pressure that might be lying below the surface, but really there, that would result in an inappropriate exchange, which on the face of it might look okay.
Can we take that one first and then come back to the second point? I think that's an important one. So if we go over to Councillor Bridget Smith, because you know those vulnerable tenants are, yeah.
Exactly, and so you're right to be concerned about that. But you know, we have some of the most highly experienced housing officers I imagine in the country, and you know, a lot of the tenants they deal with would be described as vulnerable. So I have every confidence in the skills and the ability and the insight of our officers in the housing team to you know, pick up on anything that might be cause for concern, and you know, and act accordingly. I'm sure Peter will reaffirm that.
Okay.
Yes, of course. And in practical terms, during the mutual exchange process, the officer will spend some time individually with each of the tenants. He won't just see them together. and we'll talk about the process. We do, of course, we are experienced in dealing with coercion, and you know, just this week we've done a vlog about coercion and cuckooing for vulnerable tenants. We're very aware of this. It's a growing issue, especially with the increase in more vulnerable people in society. And that's the other advantage, of course, of having the generic local officers involved, who will more likely have some knowledge of the tenants involved in the exchange and the locality, rather than just some unknown tenant from another area coming to see them.
Peter, would that include working cross with sort of police, mental health services, NHS, just sort of building on Councillor Stobart's point to protect sort of vulnerable people from cuckooing, and Anna Bradnam's point about sort of protecting people from bullying and sort of being coerced into moving when they don't necessarily want to?
Of course. So if the anything that any officers come across which starts their spidey senses tingling, we've got a well-developed escalation policy to the police, social services, or the more appropriate people. A bit of an aside, but I don't know if members do have access to Insight. But Claire Gilby, who's runs the enforcement team, did a video about this last week. And if we can work a way of doing this, we can share that with members so you can see the sort of things that we do and what our response is.
Thanks very much. Councillor Stobart?
No, those answers are great. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Councillor Anna Bradnam's indicate to speak.
Sorry, having said I'm happy to move forward, it's just suddenly occurred to me, are we talking about mutual exchange within this authority, or are we talking about mutual exchange of properties between this authority and other authorities? Because then we wouldn't know the other tenant, would we?
Councillor Bridget Smith?
So I'm assuming it's within our HomeLink cohort, but I'm looking to Peter to confirm that.
Peter Campbell?
No, an exchange can be locally, or it can be nationally, and it can be with different landlords. So what the housing officer will do is have conversation and exchange information with their equivalent within the other organisation.
Councillor Bradley?
So, all the way through, I was thinking this was within this authority.
The vast majority are.
Yes.
But it's one of the one advantage of the mutual exchanges of going to mutual exchange, that it does offer social mobility more widely, and is a very many local authorities have closed waiting lists for their allocation system, which you cannot go on a waiting list unless you live in the district. A mutual exchange will often help people to move to a new area for work, etc., or to provide some of the sort of care issues that we've been talking about previously.
And if I could just say, for residents like mine in Gamlingay, where we are this kind of promontory into Huntingdonshire and Bedfordshire, we're bordered on three sides by other authorities. It's very frequent that so in Gamlingay, a lot of the kids go to school in Bedfordshire. So I've had people with children with schooling issues, and it was absolutely imperative that they moved closer to a Bedfordshire school in order to meet their children's educational needs. So again, that shows the flexibility of our system. And I think it's right, but I'm sure I'm sure our officers work very closely with housing officers, either from our neighbouring authorities or from the other housing agencies as well. In fact, I know they do.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure our officers would undertake the same due diligence with regard to tenants moving in as they would have done with tenants moving within the authority. So thank you.
Thanks very much for highlighting that, Councillor Bradnam. So have we got any other speakers on item 6? Short exchange policy. Can't see any either online or in the room. So if we go now back to page 18, to the recommendations at item 7, it is recommended that the Scrutiny and Overview Committee considers this report and supports, with comments where appropriate, the officer's recommendations to Cabinet listed below. Is the committee happy to do that with the comments that we've made today? Can I see a show of hands that we're happy with that? Lovely, so that's unanimous, so good. Okay, so we'll now move on to item 7, which is the Q1 performance. I'm just going to bring that up. So Q1 performance report, pages 71 to 112. I'm just going to open this straight up to the committee for questions. Councillor James Howbray.
Thank you, Chair. So, just a quick question really about one of the metrics, but I'd like to say first of all, overall, then I think it's a relief to see that most of our metrics are either good or moving in the right direction, and where there are exceptions to that, then there are very good explanations given in this report for the reasons why that there may be some metrics that are not moving in the right direction. There was one example that caused me a little concern, and that was on page 83, FS117, the staff turnover metric. And there were no comments made about this, so I just wanted to ask. We've seen a gradual improvement in staff turnover, which I know is something that we'd expected should improve as a result of the 4-day working week, which of course is now bedding in. But this particular metric took what looks like perhaps a small turn in the wrong direction, and I wondered whether perhaps officers could comment on whether this is significant or just a little bit of noise, and if it is significant, if there's any understanding around what the causes might be. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll come to Councillor John Williams in the first instance, and then if you want to refer that on, that's fine. I'm happy to refer to Jeff Membry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's actually a relatively small number of people, and it was caused by the fact that we do interview people when they leave to find the reason why they're leaving, and none of these were of any issues of concern. Like, for example, there were a couple of people who decided to retire, and there was somebody who was moving to another part of the country and chose to leave. It's still comfortably within our expectation, our target for turnover. I mean, a little bit of turnover is always good anyway, because it brings a little bit of new blood into the organisation, which is always useful. I have to say, it's certainly worth noting. So if it continues going forward, it's something we need to look at, but it doesn't cause me concern at the moment.
Thanks very much.
Great, I'm very happy with the answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Peter Fain.
Thank you, Chair. For context, I'm very conscious of the fact that our KPIs are being particularly closely scrutinised by others at the moment, that where we have stretch targets, which are intentionally intended to be ambitious, that will be noted and I might even say exploited. I wanted to refer to the targets set out on page, I think it's 78, forgive me, I'm just using one screen, so I haven't got that in front of me. In relation to the KPIs on the collection of business rates and on council tax collection. And in each case, there was a slight falling back on targets for very good reasons for a short period, which I think has been recovered. And I noticed that in relation to council tax targets, we were actually, at the time we were criticised for this, seen as being the most effective in the country. And I wondered whether Councillor Williams or officers would like to comment on those places where we may appear to be failing to meet targets for a very short period and for good reasons.
Councillor John Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's terribly difficult. We are looking at first quarter of the new financial year, and business rates and council tax is collected throughout the year, and clearly there are going to be some variations, and as we saw with the last financial year, at quarter four, for the first 2 months of that quarter, yes, we were below our targets because of reasons, particularly on council tax, of extending people's payback from 10 months to 12 months. But in the end, we actually came out as joint top collector of council tax. Whereas if you looked at quarter four, you would have thought, they're not doing very well on that. And similarly with this, this is the first quarter of the new financial year. I wouldn't read too much into the slight variations against the target in the first quarter. Various reasons why the collection of council tax is either slightly below or on target. I mean, council tax, for example, if you look, for April and June, we were bang on target. It was only in May that we saw a slight fall. So I wouldn't, look at these particular figures in too much detail at this stage in the financial year. Wait until we're halfway through the financial year and then we might see a trend. But at the moment, the trend here is certainly the outlook is green because we don't believe that we are seriously adrift with where we are in the budget on either of these two.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Fane.
Just to say, Chair, that I found Councillor Williams' response entirely helpful and rather what I had hoped he would say, to be frank.
Thanks very much. So, Councillor Sue Ellington next.
Thank you. Looking on page 84 at the black bin collections, and they're good, and I've no problem with that. But it does say that you're going to try to reduce the amount that's put in black bins. And I wondered, A, whether you're going to set a new target to show that reduction, but also what are you going to manage to do to actually reduce the amount that goes into black bins?
Councillor John Williams in the first instance.
Yeah, I'm happy to let Bodie explain this, but we appreciate how important it is to ensure that we maximise recycling from our household collection, and we need to have ambitious targets to push ourselves to make sure that we do maximise the recycling from household waste. So. Again, both of these, our forecast is green. We're expecting that we will be on target or will exceed the new targets by the year end, but I'll let Bodie explain the reasoning behind this.
Bodie, Sam.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And that's absolutely right. This is one of our ambitious targets. What are we going to do? Firstly, it's education, education, education. We're going to try to encourage and change behavior. That's the ultimate that we need to start with. And then just try and show residents how they can actually reduce what they put in their black bins. We have had a few councillors actually come forward and suggest that they could be exemplar. So we're hoping that in the next few months we can get that moving. Some areas want to be able to not put out their black bins for many, many months. So it's all about education fundamentally. In the medium term, part of what we hope to do, there are no immediate plans for that, but we know that one of the measures that does work is to reduce the frequency of collection of the black bins. So if we move to 3 weekly or monthly, then we know that it's proven that that does help people to make much more efficient use of their black bins. But in the immediate short term, our plan is just to continue to roll out educational initiatives and try and change behavior at the household level.
Thanks very much. Councillor Sue Ellington.
So really we're just encouraging through communications and advertising rather than any other interventions.
For now, yes. Sorry, apologies. Increase in educational initiatives, communications, yes. We have several outlets that we use. We have several forums. We have community action days, yes. So that's the principal method at the moment.
Okay, Councillor Sue Ellington.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Stephen Drew.
Thank you. On page 82, AH211, average days to relet all housing stock. I recall over the last year and a bit, this has been a target that has been talked about many, many times at this committee. And one of the things that has been raised has been the issue of whether or not the 17-day target for reletting housing stock was actually realistic. And there's been many conversations had in relation to this. I also note that this is one of the things that has been flagged up by people who have been looking at the performance of South Cambridgeshire District Council at a national level and have used it to criticise our performance. But I now note within this quarter one report that actually the average number of days to relet our housing stock has been cut by 42% in the space of 3 months. And actually now sits at 22 days, which really is very, very close to this target of 17 days, which all members have commented repeatedly over the last 15 months is an extremely ambitious target. And I have heard members sitting on all sides of the chamber actually at times almost suggest that this target ought to be abolished and changed because it's so unrealistic and creates a false impression. Yet we now appear to be pretty close to it. So I wonder whether or not Councillor Williams wanted to comment, or possibly officers following him, on what has been done to achieve such a great level of success in the last 3 months at cutting the number of days to relet council properties by 42%.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'll let Peter go into the details of this, but before Peter does, I'll just say that as regards should we or shouldn't we have this target, I believe that we ought to, because that's one of the complaints I often get when people see a council house not occupied is, why is it taking you so long to occupy, to have a tenant for that property? So I think this does help us understand how difficult it is sometimes to relet a property because of various factors, one of which is very often, unfortunately, it's in such a poor condition that we can't relet it before we do some substantial work to it. So, and also there are cases where there are some properties where with elderly tenants, and quite understand why elderly tenants do not want the disruption, but there are some properties that have been occupied by an elderly tenant for decades, and when they move out, we find we have to do substantial work to it to bring it up to standard. So, it is important, people do draw attention to the voids, and I think therefore it is important we have some target. Now, as whether or not this target is too demanding, because clearly we are actually achieving, we are probably one of the, as it says here, we're in the top quartile of turning council properties around. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit on this, because it leaves us open, as you say, to people criticising us because we don't meet our own target on this, which is a very stretched target. But I'll let Peter explain more as to reasons why we do have difficulty in meeting this target.
Peter Campbell.
Okay, I'll start off with the reason for the target and why it's an important one. This is probably the only target that we have within the housing service that measures how the service works together. So when a property becomes empty, the first part of it is dealt with by housing management, and then it goes across to the repairs team and the contractor. It's allocated through the allocation system, which is a separate team, and it's signed up at the end of the process by housing management. So the end-to-end process revolves all parts of the housing department, and it's often seen as a one indicator that measures the health of the whole service. So looking at the graph, and the reason why the target is so challenging is that in the past, this council has had excellent performance on re-lets. The deterioration in performance during the period, early years of this graph, 21, 22, etc., was largely to do with the impact of COVID. People were leaving their properties unless they abandoned them or died in the properties. So we had a higher proportion of those properties that were in poor condition, as Councillor Williams had mentioned. And we had working restrictions for the operatives working the properties. They couldn't work in close proximity. And in the post-Brexit period, we had a significant shortage of materials. All those have pretty much resolved themselves now. So we are hopeful over the next few years that we can keep our performance within the top quartile. What you also report is, thank you for noticing the improvements. The national trend is the exact opposite of ours. Nationally, people are finding it more and more difficult to turn their properties quickly. So we're very much bucking the national trend here.
Councillor Stephen Drew.
Okay, could you explain why we are bucking the national trend? I thank you both for your answers, which are very, very clear and give a very wide information, but I genuinely want to know what it is you think that our council services and officers have done in the last 3 months to cut the length of time it takes to relet our properties by 42%. You've now given me an even more profound thought in relation to it when you've said that South Cambridgeshire District Council, which has cut the length of time it takes to relet its houses by 42% in the space of 3 months, at a time when nationally those number of days have been rising. I am genuinely intrigued how the council has managed to do this, because this strikes me as an example of incredible performance by our staff. So I genuinely would like to know how you think we have managed to do this.
And that's largely it. Over the time when our performance was poor, there are a number of unusual factors, like the ones I've mentioned: COVID, shortage of materials, labour shortage, etc. But since that's calmed down, we've had to be able to really focus on performance, especially working with mayors under the new contract. And we're focusing on performance, and we're highlighting difficulties. And when we find problems, we're really knuckling down to try and iron those out. So if we make a mistake once, that's not repeated in future properties.
So I'm not going to ask the question again, but I'm going to check that I have fully understood. So what you're saying is that through the management and leadership of senior officers at the council, focusing on performance, focusing on ensuring that we provide the best possible services for our residents, we have managed in our council to significantly cut by 42% the number of days it takes to let our housing stock at a time when other councils in the country have not managed to do that. I am delighted to hear this, and I hope that certain people who have been criticising our council and used this figure and our failure to reach that target might well like to consider that they ought to take a little bit more time to evaluate the performance of the council. Thank you.
Lovely. Councillor Richard Stobart, please.
Chair. Thank you. So Councillor Drew did an excellent job with the question that I was going to address myself, but perhaps I could just say one thing. I think too the achievement is remarkable, but what I did note was the traffic light system, doesn't nearly approach, the quality of that of the plot to the left. So I wondered in such circumstances whether there might be more of a narrative built up when we are seeing such profound change, so that those numbers can be readily explained. And secondly, I think stretch goals, and again we've discussed the value of stretch goals, can sometimes be really helpful because they drive behaviour, and sometimes they can be very difficult because they will highlight, as we've just been discussing, an apparent failure, which is not. So I think that needs to be decided very carefully, and I hope we as Scrutiny and Overview could help with that process. So stretch goals, carefully think about them, but they can actually provoke the right behaviour. So I fully endorse the kind of comments that Councillor Drew has made. I think this is a great achievement.
Lovely. I think Councillor Williams has sort of already answered that question, really, but yeah, thank you for emphasising that, Councillor Richard Stobart. So we have got Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. While we're still on that page 82, the next KPI down is AH245, percentage of South Cambs District Council homes with active HHRS category 1 or 2 damp and mould cases. And I just wanted to thank the Council for introducing this as a new KPI, which is so vital to our monitoring of our housing stock, and so important to bear in mind, quite apart from the really tragic cases that have happened elsewhere. So I just wanted to thank you for using this as a way to keep track of any stock that might be needing our attention or needing not to be let until it's in a state where it can be let. But I wondered if any of the officers might be able to, or indeed the lead member, might be able to put some narrative around that.
Okay, Councillor John Williams.
I asked Peter.
Yeah, Councillor, Peter Campbell.
Yeah, we were very aware since the tragedy in Rochdale, where a housing association had ignored issues of damp and mould in properties, that by having an indicator which looked at damp and mould, provided members with some oversight on our performance. It's been a bit of an eye-opener over these past few months. The way that we have been proactive in identifying damp and mould issues. Our surveyors who were conducting the stock conditions survey are going into people's properties, and they're uncovering, in a couple of cases, quite horrendous cases of damp and mould that had previously been unreported to us. Our problem is not that damp and mould is widespread. Our problem is not that we're not acting on reports of damp and mould. Our problem is that sometimes they're unidentified until we've had this external check. And this has allowed us to act quickly. And some of the cases that we found have been quite horrendous, and some of the actions that we've taken really have changed people's lives.
So Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Campbell, because I'm aware of some of those properties, and I'm very glad that you're taking such a proactive approach to them, because they have significant risks for the health of our tenants, but also that we need to be mindful of how we're letting those properties, even if they're refurbished, some of those properties might be prone to that problem again if, for example, they're over-occupied or, over-occupied, I think, is probably part of the problem, isn't it? But I'm just very glad, and I'm actually, I know weirdly, I'm kind of encouraged to see that there is a red rag on some of that, because it means that we've recognised that there's a risk and we're going to take steps to address it. So I'm very glad to see we're taking such a responsible attitude to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Councillor Tom Bygott.
Thank you, Chairman. So my question goes back to the question that Councillor Ellington raised earlier about black bins and recycling rates. And part of the answer to that question included the phrase that we were setting ambitious targets. In 2010, which is 13 years ago now, the Council set itself the target of meeting or surpassing a 65% recycling composting rate by 2012. And our best monthly performance around about then was October 2010, when we achieved a monthly rate of 63.7%. So in the report today, under ES 418, apologies, I don't have the page numbers on my copy, it says that we did 54.81% on a target of 52%. So our target is 13% lower than our target was 13 years ago. And that was actually in 3A's, aims, approaches and actions, which was our top level ambitions and performance document. Given that we have the aim to be green to the core, and given how much emphasis there's been on environmental factors in the past 13 years, why is our target so much lower than it was all those years ago? Thank you.
Councillor John Williams in the first instance.
I may be wrong, but I don't believe we had the blue bin back in 2010. We didn't separate our dry recycling from our black bin waste. We had simply the black bin and the green bin. And if it wasn't organic, it all went in the black bin and went to landfill. So I'm not sure you're comparing apples with apples, Councillor.
Councillor Bygott.
So, I've got Councillor Ellington next to me here. And Councillor Ellington was the portfolio holder and I was temporarily the portfolio holder for her while she was in hospital when the blue bins were introduced, which was in 2008. So we did actually separate it out and had been doing so for 2 years then. And my recollection was that it was going to cost £1.5 million to introduce the blue bin system, and the Lib Dem group voted against it because they felt it was a waste of money. Thank you.
Councillor John Williams.
Well, I wasn't on the council then, so, but as I say, I do know that the blue bins were introduced after the green and black bins. But I take it on board that it was 2008 it was done. I thought it was done after I got elected in 2010, but I accept it was 2008. But yeah, certainly we'll go away and look at this, but I'm not certain that the comparisons are as straightforward as that. But we'll come back to you on that.
Bo, did you want to come in at all on the targets that are set?
I think Councillor Williams has addressed the point, and we'll look into that in more detail and come back, because again, I don't have the benefit of the history from 10 years ago as well.
Thanks very much. Happy? Yeah. Thank you very much. Do we have any other speakers on the...
Councillor, sorry.
Yes. Councillor Richard Stobar.
Chair, my comments come under the business plan. Are you moving on to the business plan? Yep, that's okay. So just give me a moment. Page 96, it introduces or talks or presents, and there are a number of objectives around the BNG, the Biodiversity Net Gain process that's being introduced under the terms of the Environment Act, and particularly speaks of engagement with parish councils. So it's really a comment that, of course, the parish councils in some cases are trying to understand the land, and when you're doing a neighbourhood plan, just as Girton is doing at the moment, you need to identify who owns the land, and questions of could we rewild this, could we make a corridor there, kind of come up during that discussion. In some cases, parishes own land and might like it to be included under the biodiversity trading scheme. Now, there are some initiatives here, but I think things are moving quite quickly. I know developers are asking the question, can we obtain some land or biodiversity credits in this parish or in that place? So I'm wondering if these goals are sufficiently ambitious for what's a real live situation. People want to start buying credits. Are the parishes being prepared well enough? Is the business basis for the parish getting engaged in this, is that firmly established? Because it could be complicated for a parish to handle. So are there ways in which we can help the parishes and actually together across the district to actually meet this need, but in an effective way which could be the benefit to local parishes? So sorry, that's a bit of a ramble, but does that make sense?
Okay, Councillor John Williams. Yeah.
I'm on page 96. I think it's question 1C1, but it's on 96. Can I just look it up and tell you?
Can I ask, Chair, that you asked Councillor Smith to comment on this? I think she'd want to comment.
Yeah, Councillor Bridget Smith, if you want to come in.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question, please?
I'll try, Councillor
I'm
Smith.
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. A second chance, I might get it more concise. The question or the point that's raised in the business plan is implement and communicate to all stakeholders the council agreed hierarchy for achieving biodiversity net gain ahead of formal regulation. My particular question is around engagement with parishes. So if a parish council has some land or is considering the land structure in the parish, say as part of a neighbourhood planning process, how can they get engaged with identifying, can I become involved, for example, in offering biodiversity credits? So are we in a position to help the parishes do this, or to set up some kind of framework so the parishes can, in a sense, cooperate or form some kind of cooperative to offer credits? I mean, this is a really intriguing possibility, because it would allow wilding of processes while giving the parishes an income stream. So please do tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but there seems to be a lot of potential here which we need to really help parishes with. Yeah, that was my question.
Excellent, an excellent question. That's a really interesting one. So you'll be aware that as part of the call for sites, we call for green sites. And we most certainly are having conversations about how those dedicated large green sites could be used. So we're very well.
Okay, yeah. We'll come back to that. I think maybe Councillor Smith can give you a written response on that if she's dropped out.
Am I back? It just went funny. Okay, so I'm very aware that you know, it's a real challenge on some of our sites to, particularly if they are green fields. Well, yeah, they're kind of agricultural land sites. Delivering the sort of biodiversity net gain on site is nigh on impossible. So we most certainly are looking at those sites in the call, those green sites and the call for green sites to provide that opportunity. But on a wider scale, it's as part of the Oxford-Cambridge partnership, we've had some conversations about much larger sort of regional opportunities for carbon credits. And, you know, one example is the work that the RSPB has been doing at Ouse Fen on creation of new wetlands. And, you know, there's an opportunity there to roll that model out between Oxford and Cambridge. And, you know, there's benefits to the likes of East West Rail and so on, and to all developers in being able to buy carbon credits and invest their money in regional, at scale opportunities for, you know, really serious environmental enhancement, not, you know, planting 20 trees here, 20 trees there, something much bigger. So, but I hadn't thought about it in relation to parish councils. So thank you very much. And we will take that away and we will give that some very serious consideration, because as an opportunity for a revenue generation for parish councils, yeah, we'll look at it. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to bring in Councillor Dr. Toomey Hawkins, who had indicated to speak, and then Heather, is it? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. What we do currently have a biodiversity net gain protocol that we follow with new sites. And yes, you know, it scales down from the large sites, as Councillor Smith mentioned earlier on, down to smaller sites within the community. So there is a protocol, and there is a parish councils, obviously, you know, through the process of engaging with, you know, the area managers and site managers can actually discuss with the planning team as to what they can or cannot achieve and whether or not they can use a particular site. And this came up because I had you know, something like that in my ward where, you know, apparently there was some land, but it seemed that that could not meet the requirement of the particular application. So yes, there is a protocol. I would encourage the whether the neighborhood planning teams to actually talk with the officers who deal with neighborhood planning for them, and we can liaise together and make sure that, yes, you know, we take into account if they do have sites available that could be used. Okay.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Did you also want to? Yeah. Come in. Heather, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, I just wanted to add to what Toomey Hawkins has just said. So we are intending to do an update at our next parish forum. So this will be on the agenda because it is quite topical, as you said. And also, I just wanted to appoint to advise that, you know, we have appointed another officer to help us with this. And we've received some grant funding as well, so it is on our agenda. So we do have plans, and officers will be taking that forward. So thank you.
Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. Could I just add one point? The folk in Girton reminded me that they do like to join up wilded areas because it actually contributes to the process of creating corridors, which is very desirable. And it leads to the question of, you know, can the parish councils work together? And we've seen some very good examples of parish councils working together or talking to each other. But I think that probably needs some encouragement. So that would be my comment. That another aspect to be perhaps addressed as officers work with parish councils would be, you know, are there barriers to cooperation that need to be addressed? So just a comment.
So I think Councillor Dr. Toomey Hawkins has set out the policy arrangement around that. I don't know if you want to add anything else, or you're happy with that yet? Yeah, lovely.
Chair, we're happy. We definitely work with parish councils, which is why we have the parish for planning forums. And through that, as Heather Jones has said, the next one we'll be discussing this in more detail. Thank you.
Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. I'm very encouraged to hear everything that people are saying about this, but just from my own experience, when we were looking at land in parish ownership, even to plant 3 free trees, we found that actually in many parishes they have precious little land available to them for such projects. And certainly in some of the smaller villages, they may not, well, actually some of the smaller villages might have more land, but it's not a foregone conclusion that every parish has very much land available to do that sort of thing on. So excellent target to have for parishes that do have land, but many don't. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bradnam. I think we'll go over to Stephen Drew.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Go on. Councillor Williams, in answering the question from Councillor Bugger a while ago, obviously the question related to the issue of levels of recycling, and obviously Councillor Williams asked it in the possibility there may not be the exact comparison. I wonder whether Councillor Williams agrees with me that whilst it's definitely the case, the local council should take responsibility for this, and absolutely there should be no attempt whatsoever on behalf of South Cambridge District Council to deny that we have an absolute responsibility to raise recycling rates. I wondered if Councillor Williams would like to comment on the following 2 pieces of information. In 2013-14, the year that Councillor Bugger referred to, the number 1 council in the country recycled 57.05%. The number 1 council in the country recycled 65.7% of its waste. In 2020, the top performing council in the entire country recycled 64% of its waste. Therefore, in the 10-year period between 2010 and 2020, the top performing council in the country against which we are entirely legitimately compared actually fell by 1%, and it was a different council. I wonder also if Councillor Williams would like to comment on the fact that in the period 2016 to 2020, the proportion of waste nationally that was recycled was pretty much unchanged at 45%. So therefore, achieving 55, 58, whatever percent actually means that South Cambs remains a good performing council. So I don't know whether or not Councillor Williams would like to comment on Councillor Bikel's question in the context of the information that I've just provided him with.
Councillor John Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and indeed, Stephen might have added that I think the top 5 councils for recycling are all Lib Dem run councils. So I don't think anyone should be in any doubt that we take this extremely seriously. For another reason, that we want to be up there with our fellow Lib Dem councils. So it is frustrating sometimes that, that we see recycling rates, sort of stuck really at this level. And we need to, yes, make a bigger push. And I think everyone accepts that in getting people to separate their waste at source. I know it's very onerous and a lot of complaints are made about having to do it. But, in South Cambs, we only ask people to separate 3 lots of waste. There are certain London boroughs where people are asked to separate into 5 or 6 different containers. But yes, it is a very concerning issue that we have seen in the country as a whole. Recycling seems to have stalled. And and I think maybe one of the reasons is that every council seems to do it differently. And it's very much based on, in this country, on who is actually and what the equipment they have to deal with the waste. And it's not the waste isn't dealt with by this council. We collect it, district councils collect the waste, but it's actually disposed of by the county councils. So we are very much dependent on what the county council, the equipment and the way it separates the waste. We're very much dependent on what they do as to what we can do. But nevertheless, I can assure you that we are very much determined to improve our recycling rate, even though we are one of the better councils for doing it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'm happy to move on, Councillor Kane.
Lovely. Have we got any other?
Yes, Councillor Bigott would like to come back in.
Yeah, just on that point. So while Councillor Williams has a look at what our performance was and what our targets were in those times, I think it would be worthwhile looking at the question of where we came in the rankings. Now, it was obviously a long time ago. I can't remember exactly where we were, but I felt at the time we felt that we weren't too far behind South Oxfordshire, which I think was the top one at that time. The last time I looked, and I don't look at this very often, but the last time I looked was in the 2019-2020 rankings, and we performed 92nd out of 341. And that seems a long way behind where my recollection of where we were a decade earlier had been. Thank you.
Do you want to come in there, Councillor?
Yeah. So those figures, that's for, combined for Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire, when the earlier figures were just for South Cambridgeshire, and they did decline after that. So that definitely isn't comparing apples with apples situation.
Okay, thank you. Happy with that point? Yeah. So I'll bring in Councillor Judith Rippeth.
Yeah, sorry to labour the point on this, but I think it is a key point. It's really about time that central national governments have a uniform collection process across the country. So, for example, when a resident moves to a different county, they're not dealing with a different sort of system. If there was one system across the country, I think recycling rates would go up. Indeed, and reduction in food waste would probably improve if across the country there was a separate food waste collection, but we are still waiting for national government to do something.
Thank you for that. I think that's sort of been answered previously. So I don't think we've got any other speakers online. Oh, we have? Sorry, Councillor Sue Ellington.
Sorry, I just need to have my sixpenny. When we introduced the new blue bin, green bin, black bin, we all went on a jolly and looked at other councils that had introduced recycling, and we also went to a number of companies that sold the recycling products. And one thing that I came away with very strongly was that we could recycle, we could collect various different products in the recycling process. But at the end of the day, it was who was prepared to buy them. And therefore, it's dependent on the county council to find the customers to buy our recycling products in order for us to raise the amount of recycling that's worth us collecting, if you understand me. All right?
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ensign. I think that point has sort of been covered previously about the county council. Do you want to come back in on that?
I'll just say that the county council contract, of course, is one which ties in the county council for a considerable number of years. It dates from quite a few years ago. And it means that, well, one of the issues we have with it is the collection of food waste, because the current contract that the county council has, which is the current county council did not enter into, prevents us from collecting food waste. So this is quite a serious issue within the county, and quite right, as Councillor Van der Veer pointed out, that actually back in 2008, of course, we were not part of the city. We were, for waste collection, we had our own waste collection, and of course we know that urban areas are very bad at separating out their waste, you know, particularly where there are a lot of students. I always find it very interesting that young people are very interested in the environment, but when it comes to doing something about it, they're not very interested in separating their waste.
Okay, I'm sorry. Right. Okay. I'll just say on behalf of the young people of South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge City that I'm sure if there was a young person in the room, that they would fight their corner to the end of the earth. However, as a 50-year-old teacher, I'm not a young person, but I feel that if there was a young person in the room, they would fight their corner strongly, Councillor Williams.
Okay. I think we can move on from that now. So I think there's no other speakers on this. So if we go to page 71 and to point 3, the recommendations, I am happy that we've reviewed the KPIs for Q1, taken into account Appendix A and B, and Cabinet of lead members from the Cabinet have taken on board that discussion. So if the committee is happy with that, we will move on. Agreed? Yeah, please, yeah. Happy? Yeah, lovely. So we'll now move on to item 8. Just bring that up. Sorry, I'm just waiting for my computer to get there. So this is the item on the Young People's Task and Finish group. I was going to start by bringing in Councillor Richard Stobart. This item is pages 113 to 130, but if you could kindly introduce the item, Councillor Stobart. Yeah.
Chair, members, officers, what I was going to do was to make a kind of brief verbal overview of the report and then invite questions. So I think in previous committee meetings, I've given you updates. This, of course, is the, I won't call it a finished result. It is a result, but it's also a call to action. And so I'm going to present it in that way. And then I'm going to ask Gareth Bell, if he would supplement anything that I say. This has been quite a communications exercise, and Gareth was the responsible officer. I, as chair of the Task and Finish group, in a sense, directed it, but Gareth was very closely involved and will be responsible for some of the actions. So just a little bit of history. In July last year, full council unanimously approved the motion, which is listed. I won't read it out, but just to underline and supports the greater involvement of young people in decision making at the council, and requests Cabinet to establish a cross-party members task and finish group, which we duly did under the auspices of Scrutiny and Overview. So for a 3-month period, we first of all defined our terms of reference, and we constrain those quite carefully to be within the scope of the activity and services of South Cambridgeshire District Council. So we could have roamed freely, and in fact some of the aspects of the report do indicate that we wandered outside of the remit of the council, but only slightly, and I think there's some important messages in that. So over the period of 3 months, once having defined the direction we were taking, we engaged in a series of meetings and discussions. Gareth, members of the business team, and others were very helpful in helping to set those meetings up. There is a list in one of the appendices of the organisations that we met. We were, I think at times, slightly disappointed at the kind of response that we got. Employers were particularly difficult to engage. And I think there's something around what was the relevance to an employer of taking some young people out of their work, or even over a lunch period to have a discussion with counsellors. So I think there was a question of communication, which is something that we can work on. If we come back to look at this again, then I think we have some data points that we can work from. So we do say that the relatively small number of young people we spoke to meant that we could only identify the broadest trends. But we did identify trends, and that kind of feeds into the recommendations, which I'll summarise in just a moment. One thing that we did notice, and I think parents, grandparents, we all anecdotally could speak about this, was how structured that young people's group is, how many different kind of, if you will, subgroups appear when you think 11 to 25, or we define that as our age range of interest, but within 11 to 25 we might have 11 to 14s who, well, let me not dwell on this, but there are certain defining characteristics, and also between male and female throughout. As we go into the 14s to 18s, we see those who have had their education quite disrupted by COVID, but again, quite different to the 11s to 14s, and then the 18 plus, and those who are graduates and those who haven't been graduates but have been apprentices, for example, all very slightly different, in some cases really very different. So we got a sense, and highlighted in paragraph 12, of this sense of place, of this sense of wanting kind of ownership of where they live, where they hang out, the kind of facilities that they might use. One thing that we did see, and I think if you thought about it for a moment, you'd perceive it, but young people are represented by groups, and sometimes that's a school council. In the case of, say, Girton College is the JCR, but there are a number of representative groups who are able to talk to us about what's of interest to their members. The Children in Care Council, whom we met, were a very cohesive group, very intriguing to talk to, but they represented a wide range of interests. So talking to representative groups, I think, is particularly important. And of course, it's not as if South Cambs has not been involved in young people's engagement, and the notable example for the council is in the planning function, and their youth engagement is to be practiced with, I think, to a high level of professionalism and very effectively. Now, we believe, and I'll just highlight in the recommendations in a moment, that kind of engagement could be carried over into other council functions, perhaps not all of them. There was a discussion in some of our kind of group meetings of, well, why don't we try business and housing as two? If we were able to take some of those kind of exemplary processes and techniques, that understanding of how young people contribute, and bring them into the other council functions, this might be very beneficial. But one of the things we did note, in the person of Bonnie Kwok, we have a champion, and her enthusiasm is quite infectious, that ability to champion, I think, is something that we would need to look for as we sought to get better young people engagement in some of the other functions of the council. So let me just very quickly run through the recommendations. We're asking officers to share the general feedback that we got with other bodies, and that might be educational institutions and also other local authorities. There was quite a lot that we could have said to the county council that emerged. We've talked about the youth engagement in the planning service. We're underlining that as a recommendation, that would continue, and that we would see a similar kind of activity in some of the other council functions by way of a kind of progressive but cautious, perhaps, introduction. We would very much like to, in a sense, go out and meet young people, and we've suggested that the Climate and Environment Advisory Committee holds a meeting at another institution. We have one in mind, and because this is a publicly kind of available meeting, that we don't name specific institutions, but we do have one in mind that we would like to approach, and maybe this is setting a pattern for the future. We had quite a lot of feedback on public transport and buses. It's not surprising at the timing of our study that we would have this kind of feedback, and we would like to take that back to the combined authority. We would like young people to contribute to the equality policy. They have a lot to say. Within the group, the structure that I was referring to earlier, those groups look at each other and have quite a lot to say about what those needs might be and what those differences might be. We are asking officers to incorporate an updated, some statements into the statement of community involvement to better embrace some of the things that we found out, but to kind of keep an awareness that young people in our district will, their interests and their needs will change over time. And then finally, we would like to encourage members to engage more in their wards and maybe across wards with the kind of organisations that we've been engaged with. So perhaps with college councils, with school councils, just making a presence felt. It has worked very well for MPs. We have one of the region's MPs who makes frequent visits and is well recognised and makes a contribution to the life of the institutions that she visits. So there's a whole bunch of things there, and just perhaps to finish, a few of the things for members. So some awareness of what drives young people, what interests, and that can be quite difficult, unless you have teenage children or teenage grandchildren, you might be a little bit out of touch. But knowing about their world and where they sit in the kind of generational structure would be really very helpful. We identified that we need to know better about the modern drug scene, for example, because it was quite often referred to, and members can seem a little bit naive, if you're not really cottoned onto that and can give a sensible response. And communication. We might think that, well, a good way of communicating with younger people is to have a smartphone app. Well, I think that kind of, maybe that's the solution, but I don't think it is the way that we might address the issue, is to perhaps ask the question again, and we have some evidence, but we'd like to dig deeper, about what is a good way of addressing, and the numbers are, we've got like 24,000 people in that age range 11 to 25 in the district out of 160,000. It's a significant group, and we need to be able to communicate with them as well as we can communicate with the older ones and the ones with whom we actually directly do business. So there's a communications question which we are going to work on. So that's all I'd like to say. Sorry, I've taken a lot of your time, committee members. I hope that's conveyed some of the essence of what we did. And perhaps, Chair, you might ask Gareth Bell if he'd like to contribute to the summary. Yeah.
So thank you for that. So firstly, thank you to Councillor Stobart for going over that thoroughly and all the work that you've done on it behind the scenes in the task and finish groups. I know you've really worked hard on this report, and I think it's a really valuable one. Gareth, did you want to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points for me. So I think obviously a really member-led piece of work. And I think the report does mention it, and Councillor Stobart talked about perhaps some difficulties trying to get groups to engage. I think some of that is just because it's difficult, but also we've got some, I know that the task and finish group are really keen to have a really representative feedback. So we're trying to contact the groups that perhaps have higher vulnerability. So that made that task quite a bit harder as well. So it's probably something to note. And then I think the other part, just for me, is in regard to some of that kind of best practice and issues that young people seem, far more engaged in regards to council services. I think that what members saw is, and particularly through the work that planning's done, is it's much more difficult to get people to engage in perhaps more strategic issues where you can't see the end goal and you don't feel like you can have as much impact. But those issues where it feels more tangible, they're the things that have been quite successful in the planning service. It feels much more in reach for people. So just wanted to make those 2 points, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. So I'll now open it up for questions and comments. So we've got Councillor Peter Fain first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Perhaps I could proceed my question by saying that, as Councillor Stobart pointed out, this was in response to a motion passed unanimously in full council, and full council heard an initial report from him at the last meeting, and we'll hear, I think, a further report at the next meeting. I'm conscious of the options that's item 15 for this Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It does strike me that whilst we refer to this as a task and finish group, I'm wondering if, in fact, that is how we can view it. I mean, paragraph 10, the limited number of people it was possible to speak to. Financial cost implications yet to be assessed. Staffing implications yet to be assessed. Risks and opportunities yet to be assessed. Equality and diversity, and so on. I do feel that the recommendations will need to stress that there is an ongoing role here. Whilst the work of the task and finish group is very much appreciated, this cannot be the finish of it. We, in my view, have to consider setting up structures for future work, looking at how we can include young people. I would suggest particularly in the work of the CEAC, and maybe others have referred to planning. I was very conscious of the exchange earlier on between Councillor Drew and Councillor Williams as to how young people might want to contest their corner in relation to some of our comments on recycling, for instance. It's certainly my experience that many parents learn their recycling from their kids who encourage them, having come across it themselves. And I do think we need to look at the long-term possibilities here and have some means of taking that forward, not just reporting to Cabinet at this stage, informally reporting to Council, and in any sense regarding the job as done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. Councillor Stobart, do you want to just comment on that?
I would, first of all, thanks to Councillor Fain for his comments. I think he's absolutely right. We just really scratched the surface. We identified some broad trends. Yeah. We just identified how big the job was, I think. Yeah. But understanding and scoping is important. And I think we were aware that we needed to, in a sense, emphasise or perhaps encourage a culture of engaging with young people, building on good practice, but actually working more broadly across the organisation. So I fully endorse what Councillor Fain has said. It does leave open the question of how we move from where we are now to where we actually have this kind of culture taking root in the organisation. That's something for perhaps later. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we'll go to Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to thank Councillor Stobart and Gareth Bell for the work that you've done and for making such considerable efforts to contact as many groups of young people as possible. And I particularly wanted to thank you for engaging with the Children in Care Council. This is the representatives for our children in foster care in Cambridgeshire. Well, they're Cambridgeshire children. Some of them are actually fostered outside the county. And in my county role, I chair the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee, which recommends strategy for these children to the Children and Young People's Committee. But in that role, just last night, we had representatives from the Children in Care Council contributing to our meeting. And we had the most useful and informative and enlightening meeting we've had for a very long time, partly because I think they have gained in confidence in coming, and partly because they last night had a particularly eloquent young woman with them. And I just wanted to register that in the same way that the Children in Care Council representatives require a good deal of support to be able to present to us as fully and as broadly as they do from the officers of the County Council. I'm sure we're going to need that sort of structure to support them if we want them to represent to us here at the District Council. That involves preparation to the Children in Care Council so that they know what questions we're asking them to consider, then getting their feedback and then helping those young people formulate that into answers that they can give us at the subcommittee. Now, that's how it works at the County Council. So what I wanted to say, thank you very much for engaging with that particular group as you have, because one of the things that we learn from that is that actually we get a totally new viewpoint on things from these young people. Some things we wouldn't have thought of before. We as corporate parenting learn from them all the time, and I was very glad last night we had all the officers there. But I wondered if it was possible to consider, I'll just throw this idea out there, others can shape it into something useful, but doing something rather like our parish forums, but with young people. And it might be through groups of schools, or it might be through the sorts of groups that you've gathered together, but it does require considerable effort and time of facilitation. So just congratulations on what you've done so far, and let's hope we can take it forward and listen to our young people's views. Thank you.
Can I just add on, I think Councillor Bradman is exactly right on the engagement, and where we didn't have as much engagement that we wanted with employers, that wasn't through want of trying, through officers and councillors that were reaching out widely to seek that engagement. So I think that's just worth noting as well. Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bradman. So through you, Chair, this of course is the work of the group, and so yes, obviously I put quite a lot of effort into it, but it was a group activity, and I guess we take collective responsibility for the recommendations we've made. But Councillor Bradman, your comments are well received. Thank you. Yeah. I think as far as something like a parish forum with young people's groups, I suppose instead of parish councils, is an excellent idea. But it's one that we really need to feed into the kind of process that Councillor Fain was talking about. So is that one of the things that we should investigate? We need to give it a name, but it sounds like a great idea and a way of engaging across a whole range of young people. And just one final comment. It was in the Children in Care committee that we, or council, Children in Care Council, I'm sorry, that we heard the phrase first, we want somewhere to hang out where it doesn't look as though we're hanging out. So we would quote that often afterwards, but it was their phrase. Yeah.
Councillor Bradman. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's one of the things that occurs to me is that, for example, we have the Youth Connections project in Histon, Impington and Milton, just because I'm familiar with them. They often have quite useful discussions with our young people as part of their regular weekly meetings. And that might be another organisation. There might be other, the Connections project, has a bus and they go around different villages. So it's possible you might be able to feed some ideas in through that forum, which they already go to.
So I think we'll note the comments from Councillor Bradman, which feed into the points that Councillor Fain has made about how the process is ongoing when we come to summarise. Did you want to respond, Councillor Stover?
no, I think
Okay.
as long as we're noting these points as we
Yeah,
go,
lovely.
I'm happy.
Agreed. Councillor Dr. Toomey Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm going to be saying I'm putting on two hats here. One is as the lead member for planning, and the other is as the EDI champion, the Cabinet EDI champion. So this is of quite interest to me, of course. Thank you very much, Councillor Stobart, to you and the team for what you've done. Of course, it goes without saying that I want to make a comment on the planning youth engagement team and the work that our hardworking officers have been doing, which you reported in, I think it's paragraph 14 of your report. As you know, making places is the role of planning. It's not just for adults, but it's for our young people as well. And just to make a comment, that what I've noticed is when we have a planning, S106, what you provide or what developers provide, there's usually local play areas. And those play areas tend to be for the young ones. And there's nothing for the teenagers to just hang out. And this is something that had occurred to me over time. But again, it's good that that came up in your discussions with some of them. I mean, obviously, I have been supporting youth engagement program. I've seen it in action. I've given talks at some of them. And I cannot stress just how eye-opening it's been sometimes. I mean, the kids are not shy of telling you what they think. And we ought to listen. We do listen as best we can. And obviously, what we want to do is make good places for them over time. And I keep saying this, the places we're building now, it's not necessarily for us. I mean, how much longer do we have? It's for them. So, we need to try and hear what they have to say and how we can make it better places for them to grow up in. What you might not know is the team lead for the youth engagement program actually won an award not so long ago, about 10 months ago, I think. It was the Individual of the Year award of the Fountain Education Trust Future Generations Award. So there is a lot of expertise there and experience that no doubt, we can share with the rest of the council. But one thing I wanted to clarify is one of the recommendations says to support provision of appropriate coaching to enable officers in other areas. Bear in mind that it depends on where you want the coaching to come from. If it's from the planning team, then know that there's limited resource there. Okay, but I mean, we can take that up, and the assistant director is here. We can look at that if that's what you're thinking. But I just want a clarification on that, first of all. And also, you mentioned a statement of community involvement. Now, obviously, we have one in planning. In fact, we've just updated that. And we'll be taking it to Cabinet at the end of the month. But we have a section in there already for youth engagement. So I wasn't sure whether or not that was just for planning or for the rest of the council. So really it's just clarification as to what those two recommendations are, what our involvement potentially could be in planning. Last but not least, I noticed that Combatant Village College wasn't on your list of the areas, the people you consulted. Don't know why, but
I can answer that.
Councillor Stephen Drew.
Okay. As the member of the committee who worked with the village colleges, I made contact with all village colleges, and many of them I ended up contacting twice and was unfortunately not responded to and was unable to form a meeting with those. So it would have been unrealistic for me to have visited every single village college, and I can assure you that any councillor whose local village college was not visited and spoken to. It was in no way designed as some kind of deliberate act of missing out a village college. I was simply able to make contact with some and not with others.
Thank you, Councillor Stephen Drew. Councillor Richard Stobart.
Through you, Chair. Councillor Hawkins, thank you for the feedback, the comments. I think you asked for one point of clarification, statement of community involvement. And we did have that discussion when we had our final kind of discussion meeting in the group. We were talking to members of the planning team about that statement of community involvement. But maybe this is a question I could just put out there. Is there any reason why we shouldn't think about extending that statement of community involvement out into other functional areas? And forgive my naivety on this, but with a kind of due process, you know, we should be careful what we say, but couldn't that be done?
I'll just bring in Gareth. Did you want to comment? So, Heather?
Yeah, thank you for that. So the statement of community involvement is a legislative requirement as part of the local plan, so it has a specific remit. But there's no reason why it couldn't be used as a format or an example for other areas, but it is specific for that, and there is a requirement for us to update it every 5 years, which is why we're going through the process now, as Dr. Toomey Hawkins has outlined.
Gareth Bell?
So I think this is probably a timing issue. So that recommendation there around instruction officers around the statement of community involvement, which Heather's described, planning officers are in the room there, and I think what's happened here is that work's taken place to carry out this action, but that's there. So it may be that actually that could come out of a recommendation and be noted within the body of the report of something that's already happened through this task and finish work, rather than a recommendation that comes out of it.
Okay. Councillor Stobart?
I just want to ask Councillor Hawkins, did we address your questions?
One, the other clarification as to the training to the rest of the council.
Yes. I think, you know, we've made this statement here about extending that same kind of community engagement into other council functions without having, if you will, assessed the requirement. And yeah, if we were to ask planning for help, then of course that needs to be contained within the resource planning or reasonable resource kind of availability. So yeah, we've not figured out the detail of that, but we would hope to, you know, have the way the planning function engages with young people become a kind of exemplar, and then we need to figure out what's reasonable from the point of view of resources.
Gareth Bell?
Thank you, Chair. So I think it was described, obviously we've got a very experienced, very enthusiastic team leader there in regards to this piece of work. I think, perhaps it's really sharing that best practice, as Councillor Dr. Toomey Hawkins has described. There's some really good work that's done in the planning service. And I think probably this is envisaged that it's not a huge piece of work with a huge resource demand, but wanting to make sure the rest of the council can learn from that practical, tangible experience that the planning team have had and the type of issues that they've had the most success with engaging young people on. So I think there's perhaps not too much of a burden being asked here.
Okay. I don't think we've got any other speakers on this. Heather?
Can I just add to that? We're now developing a toolkit, so hopefully that will be useful so that you can use that taking forward. It is a toolkit for developers to help them engage with youth, but hopefully it will be able to be turned into something useful for the council as well and other service areas.
Councillor Helen Lehman.
Thank you. I just wanted to publicly thank the chair of the Task and Finish Group, Richard, for his open-minded and strategic approach to this piece of work, and to the hard work of all the fellow members of the Task and Finish Committee, and the many officers who supported and challenged us, and also the young people that we spoke to. It's been so important to hear their voices and to set foundations for a new approach for us to engage with them in the future. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Lehman. And I think all of that committee echoes that, so thanks very much, Richard, for leading that work. I don't think we've got any other speakers, so I was hoping that we could go to the recommendations on page 113, point 3, and that this committee endorses the report with the comments that we've made, especially those from Councillor Fain and Bradnam, around how we sort of work on this on an ongoing basis and how that will look. So is the committee happy to? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Just mention that.
Yeah. So yeah. So that part we will work into the recommendation to cabinet essentially. Yeah. Is that?
I thought the issue was the statement of community involvement not being a recommendation but being mentioned in the text of the report that goes up to cabinet.
Yeah. So are we happy with that change as well? Just repeat that in. Yeah.
Okay, there's a recommendation in the report about statement of community involvement, and I think one of the comments made was that ought to be taken out of the recommendations and just mentioned in the report, and we can come up with some wording for that.
So would you be happy with that?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Because it does have a very specific meaning.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thank for the clarification on that. But
yeah. Okay. So with that amendment, is the committee happy that it goes to cabinet? Yeah. Lovely. That's unanimous. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks once again for that. So we'll now move on to the work programme, which is item 9, and you will see the work programme is laid out there. And Councillor Stephen Drew and Ian Senior will continue to meet with senior officers to work up that plan and work programme going forward. Obviously, between meetings, if councillors want to come forward with any things for that agenda, please do come forward with that. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add to that? No? Good. Okay, so we'll then move on to item 10, date of the next meeting, which will be the 19th of October, and that will be at 5:30. And that brings the meeting to a close. So we'll come offline. Thanks very much, committee.